Everyone in that building feared him. Executives lowered their voices when he walked by. Directors rehearsed sentences before speaking. Even the board avoided correcting him. This was a man no one challenged. Not because he yelled, not because he threatened, but because he never allowed himself to be questioned. A man who believed authority meant never being corrected. A man who believed power meant never being touched. For years, no one dared to cross that line. No assistant, no executive, no rival. No one could even imagine what would happen if someone treated him like anything other than untouchable. And no one imagined that the first person to step forward wouldn't be powerful, wouldn't be important, wouldn't even be noticed. Just a girl everyone had overlooked. And as she moved closer, the room had no idea that everything it believed about power was about to be tested. The polished marble floor of the penthouse office mirrored John Hale's cold obsidian eyes. He stood behind a desk carved from a single slab of granite, overlooking the city. 3 directors stood trembling, their breath visible in the air-conditioned chill of the room. John tossed a thick, leather-bound report onto the desk with a deafening singular thud. "This is not a proposal. It is an admission of your collective incompetence," he whispered. His voice carried a predatory weight that made the oldest director's knees visibly shake. He paced slowly, his expensive Italian shoes clicking like a ticking countdown on the stone. Every employee in the glass-walled perimeter froze, pretending to work while watching the slaughter. John stopped inches from a junior VP, his silence more terrifying than any scream. Would anyone in this temple of ego dare to speak before he broke them? John Hale's thumb traced the sharp edge of his gold fountain pen. He took a slow, deliberate sip of black coffee, never breaking eye contact with his prey. "By tomorrow, 40% of the regional staff will be terminated," John stated flatly. One director gasped, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. John's gaze snapped toward the sound, narrowing until the man looked at the floor. "Efficiency requires the removal of the weak, and I see nothing but weakness here." He sat in his leather throne, the chair creaking under his disciplined, heavy frame. Outside the glass doors, the invisible staff moved like ghosts, clearing away debris. A young girl in a faded pink shirt moved closer to the inner sanctum. Why did she continue to walk forward when even the guards had stepped back? The girl, Sarah, carried a tray of simple water glasses toward the center desk. She did not look at the expensive art or the terrified millionaires in the room. John didn't even glance at her, treating her presence as a mechanical utility. "The severance packages will be minimal," John continued, his voice devoid of any empathy. Sarah set a glass down, her hand steady, her eyes focused on his erratic signature. She watched as John scribbled a note that would ruin thousands of families instantly. The air in the room felt thin, pressurized by the cruelty of his mounting demands. The executives nodded in frantic, pathetic agreement, desperate to save their own skins. Sarah paused, her gaze shifting from the paper to the vein throbbing in John's neck. Did she see a monster? Or did she see something much more pathetic? John reached for his coffee, his movements sharp and agitated, like a coiled spring. He began to berate a manager for a typo, his words becoming increasingly petty. "If you cannot master the alphabet, why should I trust you with my capital?" The manager withered, his face turning a deep, humiliated shade of crimson red. John leaned forward, his face inches from the man, enjoying the scent of fear. Sarah moved around the desk, her expression as calm as a morning lake. She wasn't looking for permission to exist in this high-stakes theater of pain. She saw the way John's jaw was locked, a sign of a child's brewing tantrum. To her, this wasn't a corporate execution. It was a display of emotional illiteracy. What happens when someone finally looks past the suit and sees the child? John raised his hand to dismiss the group, a gesture of absolute, final rejection. "Leave me," he commanded, his eyes already drifting back to his digital empire. The executives turned to flee, their relief almost palpable in the stagnant air. But Sarah didn't move toward the door with the rest of the frightened staff. She stood at the corner of the granite desk, her shadow falling over his notes. John finally looked up, his brows knitting together in a confused, dark scowl. "I believe I told everyone to get out," he said, his voice dropping an octave. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't stammer, and didn't look down at her worn sneakers. She reached out a hand, her fingers moving toward the man everyone feared. Was she about to commit professional suicide, or was this something far worse? The room went deathly silent as Sarah's hand hovered near John's immaculate collar. A security guard took a step forward, his hand resting on his heavy belt. John froze, his ego momentarily paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of her proximity. "You're being very loud for someone who is clearly so tired," Sarah said softly. The words were not an insult. They were a quiet, devastatingly accurate observation. John's mouth opened to bark a command, but the air stayed caught in his throat. No one had spoken to him in a tone that wasn't filtered through terror before. The executive stopped in the doorway, paralyzed by the sight of the untouchable CEO. Sarah's eyes remained locked on his, searching for the man beneath the polished armor. Could a few simple words undo decades of carefully constructed, cold corporate fear? John stood up abruptly, his chair hitting the wall with a sharp, violent crack. "You have no idea who you are talking to, girl," he growled low. He towered over her, a mountain of black wool and concentrated, righteous fury. Sarah simply tilted her head, unimpressed by the shadow he cast over her. "I'm talking to a man who thinks hurting people makes him look big," she replied. The directors gasped in unison, waiting for the security to drag her away. John's face contorted, his hand gripping the edge of the desk until knuckles whitened. He felt the eyes of his subordinates watching his authority begin to leak away. The girl didn't back up. She stepped into his personal space, defying his gravity. How could someone with nothing to lose hold so much power over him? John felt a strange, primal heat rise into his face, a flicker of genuine shame. He tried to summon the words to crush her, but his tongue felt heavy. The Emperor was standing in his palace, but he felt suddenly, strangely naked. Sarah reached out again, this time her hand moving toward his right ear. It was a gesture so domestic, so parental, it defied every rule of the room. The directors stared, their mouths hanging open in a display of pure shock. John didn't move to block her. He was mesmerized by her total lack of fear. The air in the office seemed to vibrate with the tension of a collapsing world. A single bead of sweat rolled down John's temple, betraying his internal chaos. Was the most powerful man in the city about to be humbled by a child? Sarah's fingers closed firmly around the top of John Hale's left ear. She didn't yank it, but she held it with a firm, unmistakable corrective grip. John's head was tilted downward by the pressure, forcing him to look at her. The executives felt their hearts stop. The hierarchy had been physically, violently inverted. John let out a small, choked sound of surprise, his hands hovering midair. "Sit down and listen for once," Sarah commanded, her voice like tempered steel. Slowly, the man who ruled through fear allowed himself to be guided back down. The leather chair hissed as it took his weight, his eyes wide and blinking fast. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the death of an old god. What do you do when the man you fear is treated like a toddler? John sat motionless, his ear still warm from the girl's firm, steady touch. He looked at the directors, who quickly averted their eyes in sheer embarrassment. The girl didn't smile, didn't gloat, and didn't ask for a single cent of reward. She simply picked up her tray and turned back toward the service hallway. John watched her go, his hand slowly rising to touch the ear she had held. The room felt different. The fear was gone, replaced by a stinging, sharp clarity. He looked down at the termination list, the names blurring before his tired eyes. The girl had cracked the glass, and now the entire building was starting to breathe. John Hale didn't call for security. He simply sat in the deafening, new silence. Had he just lost his empire, or had he finally found a reason to lead? The heavy double doors clicked shut behind Sarah, leaving a vacuum of absolute silence. John Hale remained seated, his hand still hovering inches from his reddened ear. The three directors stood like statues, their eyes fixed on the grain of the carpet. The point of no return had been crossed. The myth of John's invincibility was dead. "Sir," the senior VP whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and pity. John didn't look up, his eyes locked on the spot where the girl had stood. He realized with a jolt that his hands were shaking for the first time in decades. Outside the glass, The hum of the office had stopped as rumors began to spread. The atmosphere was no longer one of professional dread, but of voyeuristic, toxic curiosity. How could he ever reclaim a throne that had been so easily overturned? John suddenly swept his arm across the desk, sending the granite nameplate flying. The heavy block shattered against the marble floor, a mirror of his fractured ego. "Get out!" he roared, but the command lacked its usual sharp, predatory edge. The executives didn't scramble in terror. They retreated with a slow, lingering hesitation. They were looking at him now, not as a god, but as a man who had been handled. John felt the sting of their silent judgment crawling over his skin like a fever. He stood and paced to the window, staring at the sprawling city he supposedly conquered. Every skyscraper felt like a mocking finger pointing back at his own sudden insignificance. He needed to crush the girl, to erase the moment, to reset the entire world. But how do you kill a ghost that isn't afraid of the dark? By the time the sun hit the mid-afternoon peak, the story had reached the basement. In the break rooms and service tunnels, the invisible workers were whispering her name. Sarah Moore sat in the janitorial closet, calmly folding a stack of rough yellow towels. She wasn't hiding. She was simply waiting for the next task on her list. The head of security, a man built like a brick wall, burst into the small room. "Mr. Hale wants you in the boardroom now," he barked, his voice overcompensating. Sarah stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in her faded, cheap pink t-shirt. She didn't ask what he wanted or if she was in trouble for her actions. She simply walked past the guard, her presence making the hallway feel strangely narrow. Did she realize she was walking directly into the heart of the lion's den? The boardroom was a theater of high-tech intimidation, filled with the company's legal elite. 12 lawyers sat in high-backed chairs, their faces obscured by the glow of laptops. John sat at the head of the table, his suit changed, his mask of iron restored. He had summoned the cleaners to find a way to legally and socially destroy her. "We have the NDAs, the trespass notices, and the defamation filings ready," the lead lawyer said. John nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for the girl's arrival. He wanted to see her break, to see her realize the gravity of her mistake. He wanted her to beg for forgiveness so he could feel his power return to his veins. The door opened, and Sarah walked in, her footsteps silent on the deep blue rug. Would the weight of a billion-dollar legal machine finally make her knees buckle? Sarah didn't sit in the chair they had placed for her in the center of the room. She walked to the window, looking out at the city just as John had done earlier. "You have a lot of expensive people here to tell you that you're right," she said. The lead lawyer stood up, ready to begin his rehearsed, aggressive opening statement. John held up a single finger, silencing the entire room with a sharp, cold snap. "You put your hands on me," John said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "I stopped you from making a mistake you couldn't fix," Sarah replied, turning around. The lawyers looked at each other, stunned by the girl's casual, dismissive tone. She looked at the legal documents on the table as if they were nothing but scrap paper. Could she see through the millions of dollars to the insecurity hiding beneath? "I can end your life with a single phone call," John threatened, leaning forward. "You can end my job, but you can't end who I am," Sarah countered calmly. She walked toward him, her eyes scanning the faces of the terrified, silent lawyers. "Look at them, John. They are all waiting for you to tell them how to feel." One lawyer looked away, unable to maintain the facade of professional, cold detachment. Sarah leaned over the table, her face inches from the man who ruled the city. "You're so used to people lying to you that you've forgotten what truth sounds like." John felt the anger rising again, but it was mixed with a baffling, painful curiosity. He had spent millions to be surrounded by yes men who were actually his jailers. Was she the only person in the world who was actually free of him? "I'm firing you, effective immediately," John said, his voice trembling with hidden conflict. "I know," Sarah said, a small, sad smile playing on her youthful, tired lips. "But before I go, you should know why I pulled your ear like a child." The lawyers shifted in their seats, their pens poised to record her confession. John leaned back, his curiosity finally overriding his need for immediate, brutal revenge. "You were acting like my younger brother when he tried to burn our house down. He didn't want the house. He just wanted someone to notice he was hurting. John's eyes widened, a memory flickering behind his dark, unreadable iron gaze. The room felt colder, as if she had sucked the oxygen out of the corporate air. Was she reading his balance sheets, or was she reading his very soul? "Get her out of here," John whispered, his voice suddenly sounding thin and hollow. The security guards moved in, taking Sarah by the arms to escort her out. She didn't struggle. She walked with a dignity that made the guards look small. As she reached the door, she looked back at the man in the expensive black suit. "The severance packages aren't for them, John. They are the price of your soul." The door slammed shut, and the lawyers immediately began talking about the next steps. John didn't hear a word they said. His mind was stuck on the word soul. He looked at the firing list again, the 40% of lives he was about to erase. He felt the ghost of her fingers on his ear, a lingering, warm human sensation. Could he go back to being a monster after being treated like a human? The news of her firing spread through the building like a wildfire in a dry forest. But instead of a warning, it became a rallying cry for the hidden and the poor. In the mailroom, workers stopped sorting. In the kitchen, the chefs turned off the gas. A silent strike was forming, fueled not by politics, but by the girl's simple bravery. John stood in his office, watching the security monitors as the building began to stall. His empire was built on the assumption that the little people would always stay quiet. But the girl had shown them that the giant could be touched and corrected. The system was beginning to crack from the bottom up, threatening the very foundation. John realized he was no longer in control of the narrative or the people. What happens when the fear that fuels a machine suddenly turns into quiet defiance? John picked up his gold fountain pen and looked at the mass termination order. His signature was required to finalize the destruction of thousands of livelihoods. He thought of the girl's faded t-shirt and her steady, unafraid brown eyes. He thought of the invisible people downstairs who were now standing perfectly still. With a sudden, violent motion, he ripped the document into a dozen jagged pieces. He walked to the intercom, his heart drumming a rhythm he didn't recognize. "Cancel the firings," he said, his voice echoing through every floor of the tower. "And find Sarah Moore. Tell her she forgot something in my office." The game had changed, and the ruthless CEO was about to make a move no one expected. Would he seek revenge, or was he searching for the only person who knew him? The golden elevator doors slid open, revealing Sarah standing between two nervous security guards. John stood at the window, his back to the room, his hands clasped tightly. The air in the executive suite had changed from a frozen tundra to a storm. Sarah stepped onto the thick carpet, her expression as unreadable as a closed book. "You canceled the firings," she said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. John turned slowly, his face a mask of exhaustion and newfound sharp curiosity. "I didn't do it for them," he lied, though the words felt hollow. He gestured to the empty chair across from his massive granite desk. "I did it because you were right about one thing," he admitted quietly. Was he finally ready to listen? Or was this just a different kind of trap? John leaned forward, his eyes searching Sarah's face for any sign of hidden greed. "Most people would have asked for $1 million to keep that secret," he said. Sarah didn't sit. She remained standing, looking at him with genuine, soft pity. "You think everyone has a price because that's the only way you understand value." John flinched as if she had struck him across the face with a physical blow. He pulled a thin, weathered photograph from his desk drawer and slid it toward her. It showed a young John smiling, standing next to a boy who looked just like him. "My brother didn't just want to be noticed," John whispered, his voice trembling. "He wanted to be stopped, and I was too busy winning to save him." Was the most powerful man in the city finally confessing his greatest, darkest sin? Sarah picked up the photo, her thumb tracing the faded edges of the image. "You've been trying to win a race that ended 20 years ago, John." She set the photo back down, centering it perfectly on his expensive desk. John watched her every move, fascinated by the way she handled his world. "I want you to stay," John said suddenly, the words surprising even himself. "Not as a maid, and certainly not as an executive in a fake suit." He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping just outside her personal space. "I want someone in this building who isn't afraid to pull my ear." The executives watching through the glass walls nearly fainted at the sight. Would a girl with no degree become the conscience of a billion-dollar empire? The news of Sarah's promotion to personal advisor hit the company like a bomb. In the high-level meetings, she sat in the corner, wearing her same pink shirt. When John began to berate a supplier, she simply cleared her throat loudly. John would stop mid-sentence, his jaw tightening as he checked his own aggression. The tension in the boardroom shifted from, "How do we survive?" to, "How do we improve?" Directors began to speak up, tentatively offering ideas they had hidden for years. Sarah didn't give business advice. She gave the room permission to be human. But the board of investors was watching the plummeting fear index with growing alarm. To them, a kind CEO was a weak CEO, and weakness was a financial liability. Would the system allow a man to change, or would it crush him for trying? The chairman of the board, a shark named Marcus, cornered Sarah in the hallway. He was a man who smelled of expensive cigars and cold, calculating malice. "You're a charming little distraction, but you're costing us a lot of money," Marcus hissed. Sarah didn't back away, even as Marcus leaned in to intimidate her with his size. "If your profit depends on people being miserable, your business is already failing," she said. Marcus laughed, a dry, rattling sound that lacked even a spark of real humor. "John is a weapon we built. You're the rust that's making him dull." He stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her as he lowered his voice to a threat. "Leave on your own, or we will make sure you disappear from this city." Could Sarah survive the legal and social vultures circling the man she was trying to save? Sarah walked back into John's office, her face pale, but her eyes burning bright. John was looking at a report on the new employee wellness initiative she suggested. "Marcus threatened me," she said simply, not looking for protection but giving a warning. John's head snapped up, his eyes turning back into the obsidian shards they once were. "What did he say?" John asked, his voice returning to its predator-like low growl. Sarah told him, watching as the old John warred with the man he was becoming. He reached for the phone to call security, his old instincts screaming for blood. "If you use fear to stop him, you're just proving that he's right," Sarah cautioned. John paused, his hand hovering over the receiver, his chest heaving with silent rage. "How do you fight a monster without becoming one yourself in the process?" John took a deep breath, forcing his hands to go flat against the granite desk. "He's going to move against me at the shareholder meeting on Friday," John realized. "He'll claim I've lost my edge, that I've let a charity case run the firm." Sarah sat down for the first time, her presence grounding the chaotic room. "Then show them the edge hasn't gone away. It's just been sharpened for the right target." John looked at her, a slow, dangerous smile finally spreading across his face. For the first time, they weren't master and servant, or teacher and student. They were partners in a war against a culture that John himself had helped create. The air in the office felt electric, charged with the thrill of a coming storm. Could they win a corporate war using the one weapon Marcus didn't have? Truth? The rest of the week was a blur of late-night strategy and hidden data. John spent hours in the basement, talking to the workers he used to ignore. He learned their names, their struggles, and the ways the company was bleeding money. Sarah acted as the bridge, translating the language of the poor into the language of profit. They found millions in waste that had been hidden by Marcus's hand-picked directors. But Marcus was also busy, digging into Sarah's past to find any dirt to use. He found a record of her correcting a teacher when she was only 12. He prepared to present her as a mentally unstable girl who had kidnapped the CEO's mind. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the future of the tower. Who would the shareholders believe? The man with the money, or the girl with the heart? Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of cold industrial lead. The boardroom was packed with the most powerful investors in the tri-state area. Marcus stood at the podium, his smile polished, and his suit worth more than a house. "Today we discuss the mental fitness of our CEO," Marcus began, his voice oily. John sat at the end of the table, Sarah standing directly behind his right shoulder. The room whispered, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the girl in the pink shirt. Marcus began a slideshow of erratic behavior, starting with the ear-pulling incident. John didn't look at the screen. He looked at the faces of the people he had led. He saw their doubt, their greed, and their deep-seated hidden fear of change. Was this the moment his empire crumbled into the dust of 1,000 scandals? Marcus finished his presentation and turned to John with a mocking, triumphant bow. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, John, before we vote on your removal?" John stood up, the movement slow and heavy with a new kind of quiet power. He didn't look at the board. He looked directly at the camera filming the meeting. "I've spent 20 years building a cage and calling it a company," John began. "And I didn't even realize I was the one behind the bars until she arrived." He gestured to Sarah, and the room held its breath as he prepared his final move. He opened a folder containing the evidence of Marcus's secret, illegal offshore accounts. "But now that I'm out, I think it's time we talk about who's really been stealing." The promise of the premise was fulfilled. The hunter had become the protector. The boardroom erupted into a chaotic storm of shouted questions and frantic whispers. Marcus's face drained of color, his practiced smile twisting into a mask of pure hate. "These are fabrications, a desperate ploy from a failing man," Marcus screamed at the board. John remained unnervingly calm, his eyes tracking the panic in his rival's erratic movements. The shareholders leaned in, their greed warring with their sudden deep-seated distrust of Marcus. Sarah stood like a pillar of salt, her gaze fixed on the laptop controlling the room's displays. With a single, steady click, she replaced the image of her ear pull with a bank ledger. The numbers were undeniable. Millions of dollars funneled into a shell company named Ares. "You named your theft after the god of war," John said, his voice echoing with authority. "But you forgot that even gods can be toppled by the people they choose to ignore." Marcus lunged across the table, his hands reaching for the folder John held tight. Security intervened instantly, pinning the chairman against the cold mahogany surface of the desk. The room watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man on the board was restrained. "This meeting is adjourned until the authorities arrive," John announced, his voice steady and firm. The shareholders scrambled for the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the coming legal explosion. John felt a sudden massive weight lift from his shoulders, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He turned to Sarah, a smile of genuine hard-won victory beginning to light up his face. "We did it," he whispered, looking at the girl who had started this entire revolution. But Sarah wasn't smiling. She was staring at the name on the ledger with a look of horror. "John, look at the second signatory on the Ares account," she said, her voice trembling. John's eyes scanned the bottom of the document, searching for the name he had missed. His heart stopped when he saw the elegant, familiar script of the second authorized signature. It wasn't a corporate rival or a faceless executive. It was a name from his past. The name belonged to his brother, the one he thought had been lost to the streets. "David," John gasped, the name tasting like ash and old, forgotten regrets in his mouth. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, sending him reeling back into his leather chair. He realized in a flash that Marcus hadn't acted alone. He had used John's own blood. Sarah reached out to steady him, her touch no longer corrective, but deeply, truly empathetic. The midpoint twist had arrived. The war wasn't just corporate, it was a family betrayal. How could the man he failed be the one trying to destroy everything he had built? Before we continue this journey, we want to hear from you. Comment below with the country and state you are watching from. If you believe power should be used for good, don't forget to like and subscribe to see how John faces his past. John stared at the signature until the letters blurred into a single painful black smudge. "He's alive," John whispered, his mind racing through 20 years of guilt and silence. "And he hates you enough to burn your life to the ground," Marcus spat from the floor. The security guards began to lead Marcus away, but his laughter echoed through the empty hall. Sarah watched John, seeing the Iron Man crumble into a boy who just wanted to go home. The corporate victory felt hollow now, replaced by a deep, aching wound in his chest. "He didn't just want the money," Sarah observed, her voice soft and full of heavy truth. "He wanted to watch you lose everything the way he felt he lost you." John looked up at the glass walls, feeling like the entire tower was a prison once again. Could he find his brother before the fire they started consumed both of them? The office of the CEO was now a crime scene, filled with police and frantic auditors. John sat on the floor against the window, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the rug. He didn't care about the stocks, the mergers, or the reputation he had spent years crafting. Sarah sat beside him, her simple pink shirt a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "I have to find him," John said, his voice cracking with a vulnerability he'd never shown. "If I don't apologize, this war will never end, even if I win the company." Sarah nodded, knowing that the downward spiral was about to pull him into the streets. She knew the neighborhoods where David would be hiding, places John's polished shoes never touched. "Then we go together," she said, standing up and offering him her hand to rise. Was the billionaire ready to trade his penthouse for the alleys where his brother lived? They left the building through the service entrance, avoiding the cameras and the prying press. John looked at the city lights, realizing he didn't know the names of the streets below him. For the first time in his life, he was following someone else's lead without a single complaint. Sarah led him into the heart of the city, where the shadows were long and the air was thick. They passed people who looked at John's tailored pants with suspicion and a cold, hard envy. John felt the fear he used to instill in others now reflecting back at him from the darkness. "Keep your head down and don't look at their watches," Sarah whispered, guiding him forward. They were entering a world where his net worth meant nothing and his name meant even less. John realized that his power was a bubble that had finally, violently and truly burst. How far down would he have to go to find the brother he had abandoned? They reached a derelict apartment complex that smelled of damp concrete and old forgotten dreams. Sarah stopped at a door marked with a spray-painted X, her hand hovering over the wood. "He's in there," she said, her intuition as sharp as the cold wind blowing through the hall. John took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped, frantic bird. He pushed the door open, expecting a den of thieves or a room full of corporate spies. Instead, he found a room filled with photos of himself, the ruthless CEO on every cover. In the center of the room sat a man who looked like an older, broken version of the boy. David didn't look up. He was busy sharpening a knife with a slow, rhythmic chilling sound. "I wondered if the girl would bring you here," David said, his voice a ghost of John's own. The confrontation was no longer about money. It was about 2 decades of silent, bleeding pain. "I'm sorry, David," John said, the words feeling small in the face of so much directed hate. David stood up, the knife glinting in the low light of a single, flickering bare bulb. "Sorry doesn't pay for 20 years of living in the dirt while you played God," David hissed. He stepped into the light, revealing a face scarred by the very streets John had ignored. Sarah stepped between them, her presence a thin line of peace in a room full of coming war. "He's not a god anymore, David. He's just a man who realized he was wrong," she said. David laughed, a bitter sound that tore through the silence of the cramped, dark room. "He's a man who's about to lose his company to the Ares files I sent to the SEC." John realized the trap was already sprung. The evidence of Marcus's theft also implicated him. By exposing Marcus, John had unknowingly signed the warrant for his own corporate death. The room began to spin as John realized the magnitude of the downward spiral he was in. His brother had used the girl to lead John to his own professional and social execution. Every correction Sarah made had led John to be more honest and therefore more vulnerable. David had been the one who suggested Sarah for the temp role through an intermediary. The girl he trusted, the one who changed him, had been the bait in his brother's trap. John looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a sudden, sharp, and agonizing sense of betrayal. "Did you know?" John whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city outside. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her silence more devastating than any loud, angry confession. "I didn't know it was a trap, John. I just wanted to help you become a better man. But in the world of power and revenge, even the best intentions can be used as a weapon." John turned and walked out of the room, leaving his brother and the girl in the shadows. He walked into the rain, the cold water soaking through his shirt and chilling his very bones. He had no company, no reputation, and now, no one left in the world he could truly trust. The empire he built was a pile of ash, and the girl who saved him was the one who lit the fuse. He felt the weight of every person he had ever crushed finally coming down upon his head. He was no longer the man everyone feared. He was a man everyone had finally forgotten. The downward spiral had reached its lowest point, leaving him alone in the dark, cold night. He sat on a park bench, a billionaire with nothing but a wet shirt and a broken, heavy heart. Would he stay in the dirt? Or was there one last spark of the man he used to be left inside? The morning headlines were a firing squad, each word a bullet aimed at John's legacy. The SEC had frozen his assets, and the Aries scandal was trending globally in minutes. John sat in a cheap 24-hour diner, the smell of burnt grease replacing his morning espresso. He watched a news report on a small TV showing his face next to the word fraud. His phone was a graveyard of missed calls from lawyers, creditors, and terrified board members. The downward spiral was no longer a metaphor. It was his new suffocating reality. He looked at his hands, realizing he had no rings, no watch, and no remaining armor. For the first time in 20 years, John Hale was a man who could be ignored. The waitress slammed a check on the table without looking him in the eye once. In this world, if you couldn't pay the bill, you didn't exist to anyone at all. Sarah found him 3 hours later, her eyes red from a night of searching. She sat in the vinyl booth across from him, her presence still a quiet, steady light. "I didn't take a dime from your brother, John," she said, her voice a fragile plea. John didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the way the coffee stained the white porcelain. "It doesn't matter if you were the hand or the bait," John replied, his tone hollow. "The result is the same. I trusted the one person who could lead me to my death." Sarah reached across the table, but John pulled his hand away as if she were fire. The bond they had built was a wreckage of good intentions and calculated bitter lies. She saw the man who used to rule a city now struggling to pay for breakfast. Could she save a man who had finally decided that he was not worth saving? A black SUV pulled up to the diner, and 2 men in suits stepped inside. They weren't John's security. They were the new owners of his broken, bleeding company. "The board has officially stripped you of your title and your remaining shares, Hale." They tossed a cardboard box onto the seat beside him, the contents of his granite desk. Inside was the gold pen, a few files, and the photo of him and David as children. The men laughed, the sound a sharp contrast to the quiet misery of the diner. "The poor girl advisor really did a number on you," one of them mocked, sneering. John felt the old rage flicker, but it died quickly, smothered by his overwhelming shame. He was a king without a kingdom, standing in the ruins of his own misplaced mercy. "What do you do when the very people you spared are the ones who come for the kill?" Sarah stood up, her small frame suddenly casting a long, defiant shadow over the suits. "You're vultures picking at a man who is worth 10 of you," she said firmly. The men laughed harder, but Sarah didn't flinch, her gaze like a cold winter wind. "He built the tower you're standing on. Try not to fall when the foundation rots." She grabbed the cardboard box in John's arm, forcing him to stand up and walk. John moved like a ghost, his legs heavy and his mind a fog of mounting dark regret. They walked out into the cold rain, leaving the last remnants of his corporate life behind. Sarah led him toward a bus stop, a place John hadn't visited since his college days. "We're going to my home," she said, her voice leaving no room for any argument. Was the billionaire ready to see how the people he crushed actually lived every day? Sarah's apartment was a single room above a laundromat, smelling of soap and damp wood. There was no granite, no marble, and the only view was of a brick wall and a fire escape. John sat on a rickety wooden chair, feeling out of place in his tailored, ruined trousers. Sarah began to boil water on a hot plate, her movements efficient, practiced, and calm. "My brother used you because you are everything he stopped being," John said suddenly. "He used your goodness as a weapon because he knew I wouldn't see it coming." Sarah turned, the steam from the kettle rising around her like a soft white veil. "He used me because he knew you were lonely, John. And that's the truth of it." John looked around the room, seeing the books, the worn clothes, and the single bed. He had billions in the bank, but she was the one who actually had a home. The night grew deeper, the sound of the city a constant muffled roar outside the glass. John looked through the cardboard box, his fingers brushing the gold fountain pen. He realized that the Aries files were a double-edged sword that could cut both ways. If Marcus and David used those accounts, they left a trail that led back to their own greed. But to find it, John would have to admit to every mistake he had ever made in public. He would have to walk into the SEC and offer his own head to save the company. "I can't win this, Sarah," John whispered, the weight of the spiral pulling him down. "You don't need to win a war anymore, John. You just need to tell the truth." Sarah sat on the floor at his feet, her presence a silent anchor in the rising tide. Would he choose to go to prison as a man, or stay free as a coward? A knock at the door startled them both, a sharp, rhythmic sound that felt like a threat. Sarah looked through the peephole and turned back to John, her face a mask of pale fear. "It's David," she whispered, her hand trembling as she leaned against the wood. John stood up, the old executive power returning to his posture for a fleeting moment. He opened the door, finding his brother standing there with a bottle and a jagged grin. "I came to see the billionaire in his new palace," David mocked, stumbling into the room. He looked at the small space with a cruel, triumphant delight that didn't reach his eyes. "You look good in the dirt, brother. It suits the man you've always been inside." John didn't roar. He didn't fight. He simply watched the man he had failed for years. Could he find a way to reach the brother who had become his own shadow? David threw the bottle against the wall, the glass shattering like John's former life. "You think this girl saved you? She's just another person you're going to disappoint." He lunged at John, but his movements were sloppy, fueled by years of hate and cheap gin. John caught him, not with a punch, but with a firm, steady, and desperate embrace. "I know I failed you, David, but I won't let you destroy yourself just to hurt me." David froze, the air leaving his lungs in a long, ragged, and sobbing gasp of pain. The two brothers stood in the center of the tiny room, a tragedy of wealth and neglect. Sarah watched from the corner, her heart breaking for the men the world had broken. The downward spiral had hit the bottom, and the only thing left was the raw, ugly truth. Was this the end of the war, or just a temporary truce in a lifelong, bloody battle? The next morning, the police arrived at Sarah's door, but not for the reasons they expected. John stood waiting for them, the Aries files clutched tightly in his steady, bruised hand. He looked at Sarah, a silent message of gratitude and a final, lingering, soft goodbye. "Tell them everything," John said to the officers, stepping forward into the cold light. He was surrendering his freedom to save the people he had spent years trying to ignore. David sat on the floor, watching his brother be led away in handcuffs with a silent stare. Sarah followed them to the car, her hand resting on the window as the engine roared to life. "I'll be there when you come out, John," she promised, her voice carrying over the wind. The billionaire was gone, but the man was finally starting to find his own way home. Could a man lose everything and still come out of the darkness with a soul intact? John sat in the back of the police car, watching the tower he built disappear in the distance. He didn't feel the fear he expected. He felt a strange, quiet, and terrifying peace. He thought of the ear pull, the pink shirt, and the girl who wasn't afraid to speak. He thought of the brother he had finally held after 20 years of cold, bitter silence. The company would fall, the money would vanish, and the name Hale would be a curse. But as the car turned the corner, John saw a group of workers standing on the sidewalk. They weren't cheering for his downfall. They were standing in a silent, respectful line. They saw the man who had finally chosen the truth over the comfort of his own lies. The spiral was over, and the long, hard climb back to the light was about to begin. What awaits a man who has nothing left to lose but the burden of his own past? The fluorescent lights of the detention center buzzed with a relentless, maddening hum. John Hale sat behind a scratched plexiglass divider, wearing a coarse orange jumpsuit. His hands, once groomed for signature pens and silk ties, were now rough and bare. Across from him, Sarah pressed a small, trembling hand against the cold, thick glass. "The board is trying to liquidate everything to cover Marcus's legal fees," she whispered. John looked at his reflection in the glass, seeing a man he barely recognized. The glimmer of hope wasn't a bank account. It was the lack of fear in his eyes. "Let them take the bricks, Sarah. They can't take the people who moved them," he replied. He felt a strange, quiet dignity in the loss, a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Could a prison cell be the first place where he was truly, finally free? Sarah leaned closer, her voice a low, urgent hum against the static of the room. "The employees are refusing to work until the SEC investigates the liquidation plan." John's brow furrowed. a spark of the old leader igniting in his tired, dark eyes. "They're striking for me?" he asked, the words catching in his dry, constricted throat. "No, John. They're striking for the company you promised them on Friday," she corrected. He realized then that his correction had become a contagion of courage throughout the tower. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smuggled piece of yellow-lined paper. On it was a list of names, the directors who were actually clean of Marcus's filth. "Give this to the union leader. Tell them the keys to the vault are in the truth." Was he still a CEO, or had he become something far more dangerous? A martyr. Outside the prison walls, the city was beginning to wake up to a new kind of power. A line of workers stood in front of the Hale Tower, their arms linked in silent defiance. They weren't shouting for higher wages. They were shouting for the Hale standard. Sarah walked through the crowd holding the yellow paper like a sacred hidden map. She met with the head of the mailroom, a man John hadn't looked at for a decade. "He wants us to take it back," Sarah said, handing over the list of clean directors. The man looked at the names, then up at the glass monolith that had always been a cage. "He's in a cage so we can have the building," the man noted, his voice thick with grit. The glimmer of hope was spreading, turning a corporate collapse into a community's rise. Could the people John once ignored be the ones to build his true, lasting legacy? In the shadows of the alleyway, David watched the protest with a bottle and a bitter heart. He saw the girl in the pink shirt leading the very people he had tried to exploit. He saw the ghost of his brother's influence still standing tall in the middle of the street. His plan to destroy John had backfired, creating a hero where a monster used to stand. David felt the cold weight of the knife in his pocket, a relic of his unresolved, burning rage. But then he saw Sarah stop to help an elderly worker who had tripped on the curb. She didn't do it for the cameras or the fear index. She did it because she was Sarah. David's grip on the bottle loosened, the glass slipping from his numb, shaking fingers. The glimmer of hope was even reaching the darkest corners of his own broken, lost soul. Could a lifetime of hate be undone by a single, simple act of unrewarded kindness? Back in the visitor's room, a new face appeared behind the scratched plexiglass divider. It wasn't Sarah, and it wasn't a lawyer. It was the lead investigator for the SEC. She looked at John with a professional, sharp curiosity that lacked the usual corporate malice. "The Ares files you provided are remarkably thorough, Mr. Hale," she said, opening a file. "I wasn't trying to hide my tracks anymore," John replied, his voice steady and calm. The investigator leaned back, her eyes scanning the man who had surrendered his life. "Marcus is naming you as the mastermind, but the signatures don't match his story." She pulled out a document showing David's signature next to Marcus's hidden secret accounts. "Your brother is ready to testify against Marcus if you agree to a full confession of negligence." John felt the air return to the room, a chance at redemption appearing in the gray dark. "David is testifying?" John asked, his heart skipping a beat in his heavy, tired chest. "He walked into the precinct an hour ago. Said he was tired of being a ghost," she replied. The investigator closed the folder with a sharp final click that echoed in the small room. "If you do this, you won't get your money back, but you might keep your name." John didn't hesitate. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't look for a way to hedge his bet. "I'll sign whatever you need to put Marcus away and protect the employees," John stated. He felt the last of the downward spiral stop, the ground finally solid beneath his feet. He wasn't fighting for a throne. He was fighting for the brother he had almost killed. The glimmer of hope was now a steady, burning flame that no one could blow out. Would the world accept a reformed villain, or was the price of his sins still too high? The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a sudden bright burst of morning sun. The courtroom was packed with the press, the workers, and the ghosts of John's past. Marcus sat at the defense table, his eyes darting around like a trapped, desperate rat. John was led in, the handcuffs clinking softly against the silence of the high-ceilinged room. Sarah sat in the front row, wearing a new, simple white shirt, a symbol of a fresh start. The judge looked over her glasses at the man who had once been the king of the city. "Mr. Hale, you are charged with corporate negligence and aiding a grand larceny," she began. John stood up, but before he could speak, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "He didn't aid it, he was the one who stopped it," David said, walking down the center aisle. The brothers locked eyes, a 20-year war finally ending in a public, silent peace. David took the stand, his voice shaking but his truth landing with the weight of a mountain. He detailed how Marcus had manipulated him, using his pain to build the Aries trap. He admitted to his own crimes, his eyes never leaving John's focused, steady gaze. "I wanted to destroy him because I was jealous of the man I thought he was," David confessed. "But the man he actually is. He's the only one who didn't give up on me." The courtroom hummed with the shock of a betrayal turned into a profound public sacrifice. Marcus turned on his lawyers, his face a mask of purple, vein-popping, impotent fury. The glimmer of hope was now a blinding light exposing every shadow in the room. Sarah gripped the wooden bench, her knuckles white as she watched the tide finally turn. Could truth alone be enough to win a battle fought with billions of dollars in lies? The judge called for a recess, the atmosphere in the room thick with the scent of a victory. John was led to a holding cell, but this time, the guards didn't shove him or sneer. One of them even offered him a cup of water with a nod of quiet, unexpected respect. Sarah was waiting outside the cell, her eyes bright with the first real tears of joy. "The board is being dismantled, John. The employees are forming a co-op to buy the shares." John laughed, a sound that felt foreign but beautiful in the sterile, gray environment. "I'm going to be the only billionaire who ends up working for his own janitors," he joked. "You were always working for them, John, you just didn't know it yet," Sarah replied. The final confrontation was looming, but for the first time John felt he had already won. What happens to a man who finds his soul just as he loses his entire world? The door to the holding cell opened and Marcus was led in, his hands also in cuffs. The two rivals stood face to face, the architect of fear and the architect of truth. "You think you won, John? You're going to rot in a cell just like me," Marcus hissed. John looked at the man he used to call a mentor and felt nothing but a deep, cold pity. "I'm already out of my cell, Marcus. You're the only one left behind the bars." John turned his back on the shadow, walking toward the light of the courtroom's open doors. He had one more bridge to cross, one more truth to tell, and one more person to save. The stage was set for the end of the Hale Tower and the birth of something entirely new. The glimmer of hope had become a sunrise, and the city was waiting for the dawn. Will John's final sacrifice be enough to bury the monster once and for all? The courtroom felt like a cathedral of judgment, silent as the judge resumed her seat. John Hale stood at the defense table, his shoulders square and his gaze unwavering. Marcus sat opposite him, his high-priced legal team whispering frantically like cornered rats. The final confrontation was no longer about profit margins, but about human truth. The prosecutor called the final witness to the stand, the chief auditor of Hale Tower. She presented the final decrypted files that Sarah and John had unearthed together. They showed a decade of Marcus's systemic theft, hidden beneath John's blind, cold ambition. Every time John had fired a weak employee, Marcus had pocketed their remaining pension. The gallery of workers let out a collective, sharp gasp that shook the very air. The man who preached efficiency was revealed as the man who practiced hollow, greedy theft. Marcus's lead attorney leapt up, his voice a desperate, high-pitched scream of objection. "These files are unverified. They were handled by a disgruntled former employee." He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Sarah, who sat calmly in the front row. John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise like a heavy iron bell. "I am the one who verified them, and I am the one who enabled him," John said. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence as the CEO confessed his own neglect. He didn't blame Marcus. He blamed the culture of fear he had personally built and blessed. "I created a world where no one dared to look at the books because they were afraid of me." By taking the blame, John stripped Marcus of his only remaining desperate legal defense. The predator was finally out of shadows and the mirror was held up to his face. The judge leaned forward, her eyes searching John's face for any sign of a performance. "Mr. Hale, do you realize this admission guarantees you a prison sentence for negligence?" John looked at Sarah, then at David, and finally at the workers in the back. "I've been in a prison of my own making for 20 years, Your Honor," he replied. "A few years in a cell is a small price to pay for finally walking out of the dark." Marcus suddenly stood up, his face a distorted mask of pure, unadulterated losing rage. "You're a fool, John. You had the world and you threw it away for a girl's lecture." He lunged toward John, but the court officers tackled him before he could cross the floor. The final confrontation ended not with a bang, but with a pathetic, muffled, angry sob. The giant had fallen, and for the first time no one in the room felt any fear. The jury's deliberation was the shortest in the history of the high-profile corporate court. They returned with a verdict that stripped Marcus of every cent and every freedom. John was sentenced to 3 years for his negligence, a fair price for a soul's redemption. As the bailiff approached with the handcuffs, John turned to face the crowded courtroom. He didn't see enemies or assets. He saw the people who would now lead themselves. The workers stood up as one, a silent, powerful salute to the man who finally saw them. Sarah stepped into the aisle, her eyes wet but her smile a brilliant, warm beacon. "The building is ours now, John," she whispered as he was led past her toward the side. "And we'll make sure the name Hale stands for something real while you're gone." John nodded, the cold steel of the cuffs feeling like a badge of his new honest honor. The transfer bus waited in the courtyard, its engine a low, rhythmic growl in the rain. John stood in the line of inmates, his orange jumpsuit a bright splash against the gray. He looked up at the Hale Tower, the glass reflecting the city's indifferent, busy skyline. He knew that inside those walls, Sarah was already organizing the first workers' council. He knew that David was in a rehab clinic, funded by the company's new ethical trust. The empire of fear was dead, and the Republic of Responsibility had finally been born. John felt a hand on his shoulder. Not a guard's shove, but a fellow inmate's nod. "I heard what you did for your people," the man said, his voice rough and respectful. John realized that his influence hadn't ended. It had simply changed its broken, bitter form. He stepped onto the bus, leaving the billionaire behind and taking the man with him. The prison gates groaned as they slid shut, a heavy sound of finality and new beginnings. Inside, John was assigned to the laundry, a humid, noisy room full of steam and work. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't mention his former, hollow, golden title. He picked up a heavy basket of rough, white sheets and began the rhythmic physical labor. For the first time in his life, his hands were doing something that didn't involve a pen. He thought of the ear pull, the moment Sarah had forced him to look at the ground. He realized that her correction wasn't an act of aggression, but an act of profound love. She had seen the man worth saving when he was too busy being the man worth fearing. A small smile touched his lips as he folded a towel with the same care Sarah once had. He was exactly where he needed to be, and for the first time he was exactly who he was. 6 months into his sentence, a letter arrived with a simple, familiar, pink-inked return address. John sat on his cot, the paper smelling faintly of the laundromat Sarah lived above. "The first quarter reports are in," Sarah wrote, her handwriting bold and full of life. "Productivity is up 40%, and the turnover rate has dropped to almost zero." She told him about the daycare they built on the 42nd floor where his office was. She told him about David, who was now teaching art to kids in their old, dark neighborhood. John closed his eyes, imagining the tower filled with the sound of laughter instead of silence. He realized that his defeat was the greatest victory he had ever personally achieved. He wasn't a king anymore, but he was finally a part of a family he had never known. Could a man be more successful in a prison cell than he ever was in a penthouse? The seasons changed outside the bars, the heat of summer giving way to a crisp, red fall. John became a mentor in the prison, teaching other men how to read a balance sheet. He taught them that power wasn't about the size of the desk, but the depth of the heart. He watched men who had been forgotten by the world begin to find their own new voices. Every month Sarah visited, her presence a bridge to the world he was helping to rebuild. They talked about the company, but mostly they talked about the truth and the future. There was no romance in their words, only the deep, unbreakable bond of two equals. "You're different, John," she said during one visit, her eyes soft and full of quiet pride. "I'm not different, Sarah. I'm just finally finished being corrected," he replied with a laugh. The final confrontation with his own ego was over, and the man had finally won the war. The day of his early release for good behavior arrived with a soft, gentle morning fog. John walked out of the gates wearing a simple suit that Sarah had brought for him. He didn't have a limousine waiting. He didn't have a team of guards or a press corps. He had a girl in a pink shirt standing by a modest car, her arms open and her eyes bright. David stood beside her, looking healthy, strong, and finally, truly, and deeply at peace. John stepped toward them, the air of the world tasting sweet and full of a new, rich promise. He looked back at the prison one last time, a silent prayer for the men he left behind. He wasn't going back to the tower to be the boss. He was going back to be a neighbor. The war was over, the debt was paid, and the story of the man everyone feared was dead. What happens when a man finally realizes that the greatest power is the power to change? They drove toward the city, the skyline rising up to meet them like an old, forgiven friend. John looked at the Hale Tower, which now had a garden growing on its once cold steel roof. He saw the people on the sidewalk, moving with a purpose that wasn't fueled by a deadline. He realized that the girl hadn't just changed his life. She had changed the city's very heart. The final confrontation had left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a name. But as Sarah took his hand, he realized he had never been richer in his entire long life. The story of the Ruthless CEO was a legend now, a warning of what happens to the cold. But the story of the man who listened was just beginning, written in every heartbeat. He was home, he was whole, and he was finally, truly, and undeniably, and perfectly free. Is there any greater authority than a man who has conquered his own dark and heavy pride? John Hale stood in the center of the lobby, the once silent marble now alive with noise. The intimidating Hale logo had been replaced by a simple, warm wooden sign, the Collective. He watched as an executive and a janitor shared a laugh over coffee in the open atrium. There were no more hushed whispers or terrified rehearsals before he walked past a desk. John wore a simple sweater and jeans, his presence no longer a shadow but a steady light. He took a deep breath, the air in the building finally feeling clean and full of oxygen. Sarah walked toward him, her footsteps light and rhythmic on the polished, sunlit floor. "Welcome back to the world you built, John," she said, her voice a warm, steady melody. He realized he didn't want his old office back. He wanted a place where he could belong. Can a man truly find peace in the rubble of the empire he once used to rule? John followed Sarah to the top floor, where his granite desk used to sit like an altar. The space was now a community library and a training center for the city's youth. He saw David standing by a window showing a group of teenagers how to sketch the skyline. His brother turned and smiled, a genuine, healthy expression that held no traces of the past. The brothers embraced, a silent pact of protection and love sealed in the bright morning light. "I'm starting a mentorship program for kids who feel invisible," David said with a wink. John looked at the invisible children, realizing he had once been just as blind as Marcus. He turned to Sarah, seeing the legacy she had cultivated with nothing but a steady hand. The resolution was complete. The family was whole, and the tower was finally a home. But as he looked out at the city, he saw a new dark cloud forming on the horizon. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb below, identical to the ones John used to own. A woman stepped out, her movements sharp, military, and draped in a cold, expensive silk. She looked up at the building with a gaze that wasn't full of admiration, but of hunger. In her hand, she clutched a legal document bearing the seal of a rival international firm. "The world doesn't like it when a billionaire turns his back on the game," John whispered. He knew the sequel hook had arrived. The system was coming to reclaim its lost territory. The woman was Elena Vance, a fixer, sent by the global elite to crush the co-op. They couldn't allow a successful model of humanity to threaten their global fear-based status. Sarah stood beside John, her gaze narrowing as she felt the shift in the city's energy. Would their newfound peace survive a war against the people who actually run the world? John felt the old predator stir inside him, but he didn't reach for his former cold armor. "They're going to try to buy the debt Marcus hid in the offshore subsidiaries," John analyzed. Elena Vance entered the lobby, her heels clicking with a rhythmic, hostile, and sharp precision. She didn't look at the art or the children. She looked only for the man she came to break. Sarah stepped forward, her hand resting on the Collective sign with a quiet, firm defiance. "We've handled one monster, John. We can handle a dozen more if we have to, she said. John looked at the girl who had corrected him, realizing the lesson was never truly over. The sequel hook wasn't just a threat. It was a call to protect the truth they had found. The elevator doors opened, and Elena Vance stepped out, her smile a jagged, cold blade. "Mr. Hale, I believe you're occupying a building that no longer belongs to you," she said. John Hale didn't flinch, didn't stammer, and didn't look back at the library of his past. "This building belongs to the people who breathe in it," John countered, his voice like iron. Elena Vance laughed, a sound that was as expensive and hollow as a diamond-encrusted skull. "We'll see what the international courts have to say about your workers' paradise, John." She turned on her heel, leaving a scent of cold perfume and a looming dark legal threat. Sarah looked at John, her eyes reflecting the fire of a coming global and righteous war. "I guess I'll have to pull more than just one ear this time," Sarah said with a small grin. John laughed, a deep, resonant sound of a man who finally had something worth fighting for. They stood together at the glass, watching the sun set over a city that was finally awake. The story of the man everyone feared was over, but the story of the man who stood was new. If this journey of redemption and power changed the way you see the world, comment the word justice below. For more stories like that, like and subscribe. Click the next story on your screen. You won't believe who holds the power this time.